So thank you very much for the invitation. Very happy to hear debating abortion. Half 10 minutes, so we'll go straight to the point. So we have basically two arguments about the morality of abortion. So I have two ways of trying to convince you that abortion is morally permissible. So one way is to appeal to the right of women of deciding what to do over their body. So principles like bodily autonomy or bodily integrity. And there is another way is to argue that fetuses do not have a moral status that warrants a right to life. So the problem is that I will not try to talk too much about women's right over their body, because that kind of argument is, in my view, not really interesting, because everybody agrees that women have a right to decide what to do over their body. So what we disagree about is whether the fetus is or is not just a part of the body of the woman. So I'm sure all the pro-life think that women have a right to decide what to do with their body, except that the fetus is not just something they have the power to decide on. So I would want to address the second issue, so the issue of the moral status of fetuses. Also because otherwise, my impression is that people debating abortion tend always to talk past each other. So some people, the pro-choice side, talk about the right of women over their body, and the pro-life people talk about the moral status of fetuses or the right to life of fetuses, and we're not talking about the same thing. So I want to address the problem that the pro-life people are really concerned about. So the problem of the moral status of fetuses. So the question is, do fetuses have a significant moral status or moral value or a right to life? I have to say that I will provide you some reason for why I think that the fetuses don't have such moral status, but I don't expect to convince any pro-life person that that's the case. The best I can do is to show that the best reply that the pro-life can offer is something that they are entitled to believe, of course, but it's not something that can be used to inform public policies about abortion. So let me start by a few considerations about the moral status or the moral value of the life of a fetus. So what is it that, what is the kind of consideration that we use to attribute a moral value to, for example, our life? So why do we think our life is valuable, and therefore why do we think that it's wrong to kill any one of us? Well, it seems to me that the only source of value of human life is the capacity of people to attribute value to human life. So why would it be wrong for you to kill me now? It would be wrong because I want to live. I have plans for my future. I appreciate my life. I don't want to be killed. I don't want anyone to kill. Even if I was suicidal, I would not want anyone to kill me. So I would want to kill myself, to do it by myself. So I have some sort of plans about my future, some expectations that require that I am alive. So that's why it's wrong for you to kill me, and that's where I think the value of my life comes from. And I cannot think of any other reason for why my life should be valuable, or why I should have a moral status, other than maybe metaphysical reasons, religious reasons, which are perfectly fine. So, like many people believe that fetuses have a soul, or there are some sort of commandments that prescribe not to kill fetuses, this kind of thing. So that's perfectly fine. But I'm trying to argue from a secular perspective. So why is my life of special value and the life of a plant is not? So what's the difference between my life and the life of a plant? Well, I have plans, I have desires, I value my life. Now you may say, well, there are other reasons why we can value the life of a fetus. For example, you might say, well, the fetus is a living human being, and at least after a certain point during pregnancy, a fetus can experience pain. So in that way, I am exactly like a fetus, so we can experience pain, and that might be morally relevant. I agree that it's morally relevant that fetuses can experience pain, at least after a certain stage of pregnancy, But all that the capacity to experience pain warrants is the attribution of a right not to be inflicted pain. It doesn't warrant the attribution of a right to life. Animals feel pain, but many pro-life I know, including the ones I'm debating with now, at least one of them is not a vegetarian. So the capacity to feel pain is not something that warrants the attribution of a right to life. It doesn't warrant the attribution of a right not to be inflicted pain, I agree. But that's not what we're talking about when we talk about abortion. Or you might think that a fetus has a particular value because it is a potential person, because it's a human being with a future as a person. So I was a fetus once and now my life is valuable. So maybe my life was valuable also when I was a fetus. But again, I would offer the same kind of reply. So why would my future be valuable if not for the capacity now I have to appreciate, to value my future? So where does the value come from if not for my capacity to value my future? So what is the source of the intrinsic value that you attribute to the life of a fetus? Where does it come from? You may say parents, like my parents value the life that I had as a fetus, value my life, so other people might value my life. But that's an issue that doesn't arise in the case of abortion, because in the case of abortion, we are assuming that the woman does not value the life of a fetus as much as to convince her not to have an abortion. So there are a variety of arguments that do not rely on metaphysical or religious assumptions for why abortion should be immoral. But if we ask about the source of the moral status of the fetus, so the source of the status whereby it is wrong to kill a fetus or whereby the fetus has a moral right to life, I cannot see any good secular argument for why it would be, because the fetus is not someone who has planned for its future, it's not someone who has desires, it cannot value its own life. So if a fetus is not in the position to value its own life, where does the value come from? So that's the question. And you might have, or the pro-life often have, an answer to this question, and that's an answer I cannot debate. So the answer is that life is sacred, or that God commands that killing fetus is wrong, and that's fine. I cannot debate about that. That's why I said before that my argument will not convince many pro-life that abortion is wrong. The problem is that kind of reasons for why abortion should be wrong, so the kinds of sources of the value, of the intrinsic value of fetuses are not something that can be used in public debates. So I have a quote here that I wanted to use in his brief speech, and it's from Barack Obama. Many of you might have heard of this because it's quite often cited. So Obama said, "Democracy demands that the religiously motivated translate the concern into universal rather than religious specific values. It requires that their proposal be subject to arguments and amenable to reason. I may be opposed to abortion for religious reasons, but if I seek to pass a law banning the practice, I cannot simply point to the teaching of my church or God's will. I have to explain why abortion violates some principle that is accessible to people of all faiths, including those with no faith at all." So I am someone with no faith at all. And I cannot find any good secular argument for why fetuses should have a moral status or a right to life. So what I expect tonight is that someone from the pro-life camp does give me some of these reasons without relying on religious principles or metaphysical assumptions. So, and with this, I best